Just as a quick word, we are recording the session. I just started recording, so just want to let everyone know that the session is going to be recorded and shared after we're done. And so please do keep that in mind if you decide that you would like to share. And also, please feel free to turn on your cameras if you would like to, but absolutely no pressure. We love seeing everyone's faces, so it's completely up to you. Welcome, and we have a great crew here for final session of the Neurodiversity Spring Discussion Series. And as you already know, today we're talking about autism and specifically what it means to experience navigating college while on the spectrum. And I want to, before we get started, just acknowledge, as always, the generous support of the National Science Foundation, who made this possible. And I also want to acknowledge that you're likely to hear autism discussed in different terms today. There are different ways of talking about autism, and everyone seems to have strong feelings about their preferred language. And I just want to acknowledge that before we start. Folks who understand and identify autism as a disability may prefer person-first language, as in students with autism, while others may experience autism more as an integral part of their identity and prefer identity first language. So you'll hear some people probably say students with autism. You may hear some people say autistic students. You may hear some people say on the spectrum, representing the wide range of abilities and behaviors represented by the autism umbrella. I just want to ask, for the purposes of this conversation, that we do our best to keep this a safe space and just assume that folks have good intentions. We're all here to share our own experiences and learn more from each other. And so let's keep that a safe space and just assume the best in everyone, no matter which angle they're coming at this discussion from. And hopefully we can all learn from each other from that. All right. So with that, I'd also like to introduce our awesome panelists, and we've got today Aaron Picking, who is a UConn student. He will introduce himself in a moment. I'm going to just give everyone's names and then I'll let everyone kind of take over and introduce themselves. We have Christine Wenzel, who's an associate director at UConn's Center for Students with Disabilities. We have Dr. Gelbar, who is an associate research professor in the Ag School of Education. And we have Sean Smith with us, who is just a wonderful resource for us. And he is the CEO and founder of Don't Diss My Ability, and he will tell you a little bit more about that. So Aaron, do you want to just quickly say a couple words and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, and thank you for having me, Connie. Hi, my name is Aaron Picking. I'm a retired veteran. I'm going to UConn now, majoring in chemical engineering. I'm also a student advisor for the Include program. And that's kind of how I got involved in that, was through researching adult autism. When I was younger, I got diagnosed with Asperger's, so that's what I know it as. And the more research I did, especially being in the engineering school, I realized there should be more of us, or where are we at? So I started wondering, how can I survive in that environment? I felt kind of like on my own. So that led me to more looking into more stuff. I eventually connected with Dr. Krasochu about the Include program, which is a big coincidence I could talk about later. And that's how I ended up speaking today.
Awesome. Thanks. Christine.
Hi, thanks for having me. The Associate Director in the Center for Students with Disabilities at UConn. And part of my role in the office is that I do work with all of the students who register with the center and identify as being on the autism spectrum. I have a general caseload of about 500 students, but within that, I work with all of our students on the spectrum. And in addition, I started and currently still oversee a program that we have within the center called the Beyond Access program that was really initially intended to work with students on the spectrum, but it is sort of expanded to take into account that there is a lot of comorbidity and that there are a lot of students that could benefit from that executive functioning coaching and the social skills coaching that goes along with the program. So that's sort of what brought me to the table today.
Thank you. Dr. Gelbar.
Hi, my name is Dr. Nick Gelbar, and I'm an associate research professor in the NEAG School of Education. My research focuses broadly on college students with disabilities, but I've also done a lot of work specifically focused on autistic students in college and students as they move from high school into college. And I was trained in person first, so if I accidentally slip into that, please don't be offended. It's just the way I was trained. So. I'm also a psychologist and do work diagnosing and helping people to access the right forms of treatment as well.
Awesome, thank you. And Sean.
I'm Sean Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Don't Diss My Ability. I'm a psychotherapist by trade. I self-identify as being neurodivergent and work with other uniquely gifted neurodivergent individuals and learners in a lot of different capacities.
Thank you so much. And I'm also just going to quickly give a shout out to Caressa Wakeman, who is the grad assistant on our program. And she will be fielding questions in the chat. So feel free to throw questions in whenever you feel a question and coming on, and she will send it over to the right person. So thanks, everyone. All right, so we're going to just get started with a broad question, and there's no one answer to this, but the broad question that we'd like to address today is, what does it mean to be a college student on the spectrum? What are some of the shared and common experiences? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the ways that we thrive? So I'm gonna throw this one over directly to Erin to get us started, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. All right.
All right, that sounds good. So what it means for me to be on the spectrum and be in the university right now is a lot different than it was when I was younger. So I joined the military, and that was easy for me to hide. And I kind of do that now. Like in my schedules, I have to have a language class in my schedule. It's my one time of day during the semester, any semester. I can just speak a language, and I'm not like, it's kind of like my place to hide. So that's kind of what it means. That's kind of what it means for me at this moment. And it's turning into survival. So it's not like I can hide anymore. In the military, I was given orders. I was waking up at a certain time. I had to go do stuff. And I still have that structure, but now I'm making my schedule and making those decisions of what the activities of the day are. And it really is survival for me because I have a hard time because my schedule needs to be memorized. So I'll memorize my days like 3 days in advance sometimes. And if something goes off, if the bus is late or if I get stuck in traffic, I have to redo that whole thing for the day. So being here at a university at this age, it's really challenging to add that on to chemical engineering curriculum and everything else that I'm going through. But luckily, there are groups. Like I got started with the neurodiversity group that we have at UConn, and that's led by Emily Tarkanish, and that's what led me into doing more research about adults with autism, because at this point in my life, especially after being retired from the military, I was like, I have to survive. This is like my last chance. These skills that I know I don't have, I need them. And that's what brings me up to this point now.
So I heard, some keywords there a few times. You're talking about finding a way to hide and also survival. And I'm wondering if any of the other panelists on our discussion today have any thoughts about this feeling of needing to hide and how students are navigating that particular challenge of just surviving this environment, which can be so difficult.
I think that part of the survival is what we don't see. It's the anxiety and depression that occurs because of the masking that people do in order to appear, you know, quote unquote normal, to kind of blend in with everybody else when we aren't like everybody else. But, you know, this is the challenge of having an invisible disability, is that, you know, we know that we have it, but not everybody else can see it. And trying to explain that to somebody is asking the neurodistinct person or neurodivergent person to relive those traumas, you know, that we've experienced and sets us back. But one of the things that Aaron said that really kind of I encounter, especially with like folks that I work with who are in the military, right? Like we thrive on structure, consistency, and routine, and it's kind of like a tripod with three legs. When you knock one of them out, the other two come crashing down. And in the military, you have, you know, you have all of that designed and built for you. You don't have to question that. But as soon as you leave and you enter into the civilian world, you have to try and create that for yourself. And it's difficult for neurodiverse people. And this is something I relate to, right? Like if there's structure, I can thrive on that. Or if there's something I'm doing, there's a template, I can follow that. But in the absence of that, and I have to create something on my own, that's where the challenge occurs. So I definitely relate to what Aaron's saying, like trying to create that, trying to remember it, trying to stick to it. Those are some of the major challenges.
And I can share just things that students have said to me over the years. There's a couple of analogies that always stick out to me when students have tried to explain the difficulties that they have, which touches on things that the other panelists have already said. But you know, one of the things is all of that unseen stuff, right? Which we've already alluded to, but it might be, I don't want to say easy, but it might be not that big of a deal for somebody to be thinking about three things at once and be able to filter out information and make decisions in that space. For a lot of the students that I'm working with that identify as being on the spectrum, they report that they can't filter that stuff out quickly. And what we know about college is that there's a lot of input happening all of the time, whether that's just walking to class, you know, there's an influx of students. I mean, as an employee, when I can always tell, like if I'm going into work at certain times when it's a busy class passing time, right? There's an influx of students that pass on campus. I sometimes get overwhelmed because it's just all of a sudden it's nice and quiet. And then there's like, whoosh, you know, all of these students. And so I experience a level of anxiety sometimes where it's like, you know, I just want to get back to my safe little space. Students have said to me, it's like that all of the time for them because there are so many inputs. There's so many things going on. There's so much to try to figure out and decipher from a social perspective and just all of the sensory things that are happening. But the two analogies that I want to share, and I have gotten permission from students, from these two students to share these analogies because I do use them quite often. One of the students said to me once that it's almost like his brain is like a big pot of soup on the stove. And he said, you know, when it's cooking, it's bubbling, right? And for a lot of people, when you turn off that heat, it settles and the fat rises to the top and you can skim it off and get to the soup, the main ideas. And he said, my brain never stops. The stove never turns off. It's just constantly bubbling and I can never really skim off the top and get to what I'm trying to, like what I need to do. It's just, there's too much happening. And I just always think about that when we're talking about this topic, just because I do think that that's a good summary for a lot of students' experiences. And it's stuff that we don't see, and it's stuff students are dealing with in addition to trying to go to class, go to a job, engage in social activities, or whatever else they have on their plates. And another analogy that's a little bit more simple, but a student said to me, it's almost like having autism for me is like I was taken and dumped in a foreign country and I don't speak the language and there's nobody there that understands my language and I have no way to communicate. And she said that was my experience in the K through 12 environment, but I got used to it. And then I came to college and she said it was like that all over again. So I just wanted to share those because I do think that for me anyways, I always, those analogies resonated with me, and I think that they might be helpful in this conversation.
I think the only thing that I can add to that is when I've, sort of talked with students, both clinically and in research, they often also, to actually even give a simpler analogy, they often sometimes talk about just the need to recharge the batteries, because it's sort of like putting all of this effort in socially in a class period, putting it, in a different setting, that they need that downtime. And you can think about having to schedule that time for yourself and to take that time to recover and recuperate, which is so important, which is an added burden that you experience. I think that that's something that's important to consider when we think about the experiences. And I think there's so many different experiences across individuals as they enter college. But I also wanted to highlight that it's important, as Christine just said, high school also has a lot of structure. It's not quite as structured as the military, but it has a lot of structure. And we then throw students into an environment when there is no structure, there is no supervision, and that can be a daunting experience for them.
So talking about this added burden of processing all of this information and all of the input coming at students, what can instructors and faculty do, or what should they keep in mind to help reduce that burden, or just make the experience better for students?
Something that Christine said about the sensory perceptions and the brain not showing off with the water. I noticed in one of my courses that at the beginning of the semester, we would all fight for this corner in the back of the room. And when people come in, we would just kind of huddle in it. Well, eventually we found out who was getting in which spot, and we all kind of had this unspoken bond together that we had our spots in that corner. So we left each other's spot alone. Um, but what instructors can do, I think, with the experience I've had, is maybe just understand that we're there. And so, like with the Autism Speaks and the campaigns for autism awareness, and then being in this class in a university setting, and even as an older adult compared to the other students, it's still kind of that factor for me that, hey, we grow up, so it's almost like maybe some people don't believe it's still autism past a certain age or something. I don't know, but it seems like there could just be an awareness of that in their classrooms, rather than just, oh, these people are on a list and the people on this list get 2 hours for a test instead of one. That it's much more than that. I think that awareness would just really help.
I think awareness and stimuli and what's happening. So like if there's a lot of commotion in the class and somebody who's neurodiverse is asking a question and there's a lot happening around them, they then have to try and filter the information that's being relayed to them against all of the other stimuli that's occurring at the same time, which is a challenge. So, keep things short, concise, to the point, provide one-on-one time for questions so that they don't have all those other factors occurring at the same time. And although I'm not a student at UConn, I mean, I think that there's something to be said for noise canceling headphones. And for profs to understand that if a student is wearing those, they're not trying to dismiss what they're saying, but it's a means of self-preservation. It's not trying to tune the prof out. It's that they're trying to tune a lot of other stuff out that's happening around them, and just to have that awareness and understanding.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Sean. I think there's been one song each semester I listened to the entire time, like one song on repeat.
I think what's also important about what Aaron said, though, to realize is that there are also neurodiverse students and autistic students that aren't on that list of students who get accommodations, who haven't disclosed. We know only about half of students disclose to a university and say that they have a disability and go through the formal process. At UConn, we probably, because we're a much more welcoming and opening community, it might be that we have less students who are doing that. So I want to put that in some context, because we're, Christine and her group is at the forefront of doing this, but just sort of generally across higher ed, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of students who are neurodiverse that aren't on that list of students who receive accommodations as well. And to know that they're there, and to know that if someone's struggling, you may need to point them to the Center for Students with Disabilities or other things and work to help them to self-advocate.
And I would just add that, you know, some of them may not be aware. You know, they may have gotten to that point. I mean, I was diagnosed at 30, right? So we have a lot of adults who are being diagnosed later in life. So to be able to, you know, help pave the way and show them where the resources are, where they could get assessed if they need a diagnosis, that, you know, for me, it totally changed who I am as a person, what I was able to achieve academically. Like I went from a 2.3 undiagnosed to a 3.7 diagnosed GPA. So it can make a huge, huge difference. So being able to help people identify that and then point them in the right direction to get the help and resources that they need.
And I just want to echo what everyone has said. You know, certainly our center is there for as a resource, and you know, there have Aaron, when you mentioned, or maybe it was Sean, whoever mentioned the headphones, you know, that is an accommodation I have approved for students that I'm working with, and I will send, with the student's permission, I will send a notification to the faculty member to let them know that, to your point, it's not that the student is trying to be rude, but this is what they need to do in order to stay attentive in the course. And so, you know, those are the times when our office can kind of help that student navigate and advocate with the professor. But to your point of that, there are students that may need the accommodations and don't know about our office, or just haven't identified yet or haven't been given a diagnosis. You know, that's why we always welcome doing things like this, just to let faculty and as many people know as possible that our office is there and what we do, so that if a faculty member does, you know, has a student in their class and that student has either reported difficulties or the professor observed something, they know that our office is there as a resource and they can help refer students to us and help them find us if that student wants to engage with us.
Can we ask questions?
Absolutely.
Thanks. So hi, this is Marissa. I'm sorry I don't have my camera on because I am in the car. One question that I have is related to our, you know, include pro. So focus for us is to be providing students with choices in terms of like different modes of representation, different modes of assessment, you know, be able to provide more flexibility in the way that we teach and that students learn. And, you know, we've had a little bit of a conversation on that, but it seems to me that there is a tension between that flexibility and the choice and the structure that that works better, you know, for a lot of students with autism. And I just, you know, would like to ask, like, do you feel there is a tension, or if there is clear structure in the way that we provide choices, that's still okay?
I feel like that question was tailored for you specifically, Aaron.
Hi. Hi, Maria. I think there's still a lot of tension with the few professors that I've had. The other ones have been very understanding of it, and that has been so helpful throughout the last couple of semesters, that I've been more outspoken about what's going on and accommodations and whatnot. There have been a few professors where I would ask a question and they would just tell me, well, come to study or come to office hours. I'm like, that's only an hour. And you're asking questions on the exam that are from an entire semester of the class before that you're not telling us to study for. And I couldn't, so there was a lot of tension there. It was almost like, I was with a couple professors, this has happened. And it's almost like they don't believe what's going on or something. They don't want to take the time to understand that surprises like that, we're not trying to get one over on them, or we're not trying to cheat or get the answers for the next test, that we really don't like those surprises. So it's kind of a yes or no question, or a yes or no answer. I'm sorry, I can't give it to you straight. So there's tension in some places, and other places it has been awesome.
If I can just kind of
so I that that is, you know, in advance.
So Marissa, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm gonna repeat what I think I heard. That Marissa was saying that she's hearing you say it's the surprise element that that is unpleasant and causes tension, rather than if you knew ahead of time you were going to have certain choices, then that would be still sufficiently structured.
Yes. And it seems like the professors had issues with just totally disregarded my question like altogether. So I tried to explain I'm in CSD and I'm registered with them, and I have some issues with the time management and things like that. Is if I have to study an entire other semester of the subject you're surprise questioning us on, that's a lot. That's a lot of burden on me. But if I could just know, okay, that's what's going to be the case. But there was still a lot of tension. It's like they didn't want to answer anything after that. So that's really where it was coming from. I don't know if they thought I was trying to like find out what was on the next test or trying to like talk them into giving me some answers for it. But there was a lot of tension in trying to get them to understand that I don't understand and that it's going to take me a long time to figure out what I should study or what I shouldn't with the time management.
If I could just add to that, because I think part of the problem is that when somebody who's neurotypical gives us a request or tries to relay information, their expectation is that it's concrete and it's solid. But the problem is, the more we think about it, the more abstract it becomes, and so we start to question and dissect, and so then it waters things down. So we don't really know what to focus on. So when we're left to our own devices and we need to kind of worry or wonder about what it is we're actually supposed to be doing, we don't know where to hone in or focus our time. So the more direct and concise they can be, the easier it's going to be for all of us to try and figure out exactly what it is we need to be doing and how we should allocate our time accordingly.
So we have a question from the chat from Sudha. How do faculty strike the balance between being supportive and offering more help versus respecting a student's autonomy and being able to reach out when they feel they're ready?
I think that's a tightrope that faculty have to walk in terms of being supportive and sort of working with that student. And I think that's why I think that the faculty is not the one who's going to reach out to the Center for Students with Disabilities. They need to be encouraging the student to do so. And I think, as someone else said in the chat, I think some of this is also just using the tenets of universal design for learning and thinking about how we can create and maintain structures and courses up front so that the expectations are really clear to all students. I think all students benefit when expectations are made clear to them. That's my sort of initial reaction to that question, to hopefully give some of the other panelists some time to think about, because it's a hard question to answer about that right balance between the two things.
I tend to think of, how would you approach your child or a nephew or a niece or a cousin, right? Everybody knows somebody with a disability. Statistically, it's impossible not to. So, if there's a disconnect in how that person is approaching it, I think they're thinking of it as a us versus them type of mentality when it's just us. And so trying to get people to acknowledge that, this person isn't trying to get a leg up. How would you help somebody who's related to you? How would you help a friend? Although there's the distinction between professor and student, I think that tightrope that Aaron is talking about is, they just need help. So if there is a way to help them, why not just do that instead of making it harder, instead of easier? And again, acknowledging that we're not trying to give the students an advantage. we're trying to level the playing field. But trying to get somebody to understand that, well, if they don't understand it, trying to get them to understand is going to be a challenge, because it's to justify a disability to somebody who doesn't get it or who doesn't understand it. And I'll say what a lot of people maybe can't say. It comes from ignorance, right? If somebody's in a wheelchair, we may not understand how they got there, but based on our own biases and experience, we can come up with a story in our heads about how that person came to be in a wheelchair. But for somebody with an invisible disability, because they can't see our suffering, they don't have a baseline to contextualize it from. So they can't see our suffering. So it's harder for them to understand it than it is if somebody has a physical or a mobility disability, right? So it's trying to get them to understand that a disability doesn't always look like somebody who's in a wheelchair. It doesn't always look like somebody who has a physical disformity. It very much looks like the people who are on this panel and other places and other students.
So that actually brings me to kind of a different point, and our project is very firmly based in the idea that all of our different types of brains bring gifts and abilities that we need, especially for engineering. So I'd like to just flip this conversation for a second and ask if the panelists have any thoughts to share um, about autism related strengths, about ways um, that you thrive. Um, for example, Erin, I know we talked about some examples in our conversation last week, ways that you use your strengths and you use the way that you think um, to succeed in your classes and in your interests. Um, so I just want to flip that around a little bit and ask if anyone would like to share a little bit on that subject.
That's a really, it's a general, very, very general question. I think there are so many different strengths um, that people bring, and it varies like person to person. I think painting with some really broad brushes, I think work ethic, honesty, I think the creativity of being neurodivergent, I think is so important, that seeing the world in a different way can really help with problem solving and other things. But those are sort of my like three kind of big strengths that always come to mind when I talk about autistic individuals.
I think one of the things that has helped me, and I've even included this in my intake forms for my clients, is, do you have an identified gift? And then taking that thing that nobody's really looked at or asked, and turn that into everything. And so I'm a huge fan of contextual learning. When I went back to do my master's degree, the first class I took was ethics, and it was dry and it was extremely boring. And so I had this idea of, how do I take something that's extremely boring and I really don't want to do, and how do I make this exciting, and how do I put my spin on it? And so I was placed in a group where we had to do a poster board project that was worth 50% of my grade. And I came up with the idea of using, I love movies and pop culture. So I came up with the idea that, luckily the people in my group agreed with doing. And so instead of just, going through each ethical scenario, we found these scenarios played out in pop culture movies. So we're able to show them how things were done. Add a little candy bar and some popcorn, we got an A+. But it's finding my own unique way to put a spin on something that allows me to, you know, let the creativity flow and not be held back or stifled by doing things in a conventional way. So having the option, the flexibility to put my own spin on it and do it in a way that is exciting to me, because if it's not exciting, then it's boring. And if it's boring, I can't do it. I ran into another situation in an assessment class, also very dry and a little boring. And so we were going over the Wyatt, and we had to, do a presentation on this. And so I came up with another idea of, let's present it as though we were doing an infomercial. And so we did that. We all had aprons and the headsets, and we came out, and that's how we presented it. A+, right? So I think allowing the students to use their own creativity and their own ideas for how they want to present the material that they've learned is a huge step. But for me, to condense that, it's contextual learning and giving students that option to do that, and acknowledging what their strengths and gifts are and how they can incorporate that into their education.
Well, and I think just from, Sean, you touched upon this in everything that you just said, but, one of the things that I think this project is really trying to promote and that we all would love to strive for is the universal design. And I think, Sean, what you just said is exactly that, right? Figuring out if there are ways to design courses so that there are many different ways that a student can demonstrate their learning. So for you, it sounds like because you're super creative and like to just figure out how can I take this project that may not be so much exciting for me and make it something that I'm interested in, right? For another student, doing that and getting up in front of a class and doing a presentation like that might make them shut down and not want to do the assignment. So I think it's about finding different ways that students can express their knowledge and still demonstrate their competencies in the class, but in a way that is comfortable for them. And so I think that is what, universal design is really trying to strive for, is figuring out ways that we can offer students options so that they can demonstrate their knowledge, they can meet those competencies of the course, but do it in a way that really makes sense to them, and that would let them shine. And so, I think that ultimately that's the goal, right?
Yes, Christine, and that's a great segue into what happens after university. Like for instance, people on the spectrum have an employment rate of like 20%, which is lower than those with Down syndrome. So to get them started now with university with programs like this and jumpstart them into their careers in an office setting, in an engineering setting, any kind of any professional setting. So to start that now and to give them that jump start, and for UConn to be involved in that such a pioneering time, that's an excellent that's going to be an excellent new paradigm in teaching, so at the university level like this.
So Aaron, you just mentioned the employment rate, and I also want to mention sort of related to that in our engineering field and the research that we've read, only 5% of students with autism are enrolling in engineering. So, clearly there's some kind of disconnect here going on. What needs to happen for engineering to welcome, students with autism, or and celebrate their unique abilities and bring everyone into the table? What needs to change?
And that's actually the coincidence that brought me to speak with Dr. Crisotru, is that when I was learning more about dealing with it as an adult, and the unemployment rate, I found out, I think from Heigley Stiglitz-Ham, I think she talked about that, and she has a living community for people on the spectrum. Sorry, what, I lost track. So with the unemployment rate like that and getting people into engineering, that's the reason I looked something up one day on the Husky News, and that was the Include programs, the first time I heard of it. So it was all coincidental, and that's how it's coming together. But as far as how do we get people on the spectrum or with neurodiverse people to keep going in an endeavor like engineering, because I think we know a lot of them do go into math, physics, and especially computer engineering, but why not chemical? Why not electrical? So I try to think about why I pick chemical myself, but my brain thinks in 3 dimensions naturally. So to me, I can do chemistry without a paper, but I can't do physics without paper. So to me, it's just natural. I just chose chemistry because it's where my brain lives. But as far as like how to get somebody who might like electrical engineering, but then when it comes to choosing a major, they choose something else instead of what they really wanted to do. I think that's a big point that we can focus on to find that out. because I really kind of only know from my experience why I chose chemical engineering.
On that
I could,
note, oh, sorry, Sean. You want to say
I
something?
sure. I just think that, I think one of the reasons why students may be reluctant is because they don't have tangible examples of success stories that they can identify with. So the more people who are enrolled, like Aaron, who can show them, like, yes, I was here, I did this. Maybe it was challenging. There were parts of it that were hard, and he's able to share those experiences with others, but still get through the program. They have a tangible success story that they can look to give them the confidence they need to try it. I think that's part of what's missing. So the more people who go through the program, the more people who are successful, the more people who can be champions and advocates, and as you know, Caressa just said, role models, then there will be more people. But it starts with having kind of the core group who are determined, brave examples to kind of champion what we're doing. And Aaron's a great example of that.
So we had a question in the chat that I was waiting for the right time to bring up, so this seems sort of appropriate. From Dr. Zagi, we have, what is your experience, and I guess this would go directly to Aaron. What is your experience in writing intensive courses? Do you feel like you prefer a course that's more writing intensive, or do you feel like it has its own challenges? Does that make sense?
Yes, I've done very well in writing intensive courses, except for the ones like of all the language courses I've taken, I only got one A in English anytime. So um, writing intensive courses on a subject that I can get into, that's like that's nirvana for me. Like for instance, like right now I'm taking ethics, and we read these papers, and then my mind starts going on the argument to for this paper, and to me that's I'm in the zone. So but I've been told my writing's really flowery as well, so that's a it's it's kind of double-edged sword. The classes go really well, but then there's that aspect of like, how do I not put everything I'm thinking into this paper? So narrowing it down on the topics has been a real challenge. So right now when I read my papers, they sound so dry, but then I get better grades on them. So it's that double-edged sword that I really haven't learned to balance yet.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for the question.
I'd like to just encourage the audience at this point, since we have about 15 minutes left. If you do have a question that you want to put into the chat, or just unmute and go ahead and say it out loud. We have some time for that, so I'm going to just pause for a moment and give you a chance to pop those questions in if you have any.
Connie, if I could interject I remember what I forgot the first time.
Sure.
Sure. During that time, I was doing the research and looking into stuff and noticing where the neurodivergent people were in all these engineering classes and my math and physics classes. So I was looking, I already have a degree in psychology. So I was like, well, maybe I'll go to grad school for organizational psychology and actually work with the industry, because we're out there. How many managers in the industry don't realize that their employees are working with these neurodiverse conditions? So even starting now, this is another jump start to maybe getting that tied into the industry as well. And if we were talking about strengths earlier, that was one of my strengths, is noticing patterns and where things, where I see them melding together, like two things that no one would ever think of being connected. Kind of like, hey, those are connected. We're like, whoa, wow, it is. So that was kind of my plan and how we got here as well.
Awesome. And I know there are some interesting books coming out recently, I believe, that deal with this pattern seeking and innovation, the connection to you know, finding patterns that others don't see, and that being a driver in innovation. I will put something in the chat when I find it. But
So we have a question from, I have no idea how to pronounce your name, but it starts with a G, and I don't want to botch it. For Christine, what resources are offered by the Center for Students with Disabilities for autistic students, and what about students who have not been formally diagnosed?
Sure. So, the way that our center works is students self-identify, they register with us, and then we engage in a conversation with them. And that's really where it starts. And we will talk to students about what they're experiencing, what brought them to the office, if they've ever received accommodations. So a lot of times we do talk to students that may not have been formally diagnosed. They're just really struggling and they're not sure what's going on and they're kind of looking for some guidance. So we really do encourage students to reach out to us, even if they haven't officially been diagnosed. Having said that, most times students that have an official diagnosis have made their way to our office because a lot of times as freshmen, their parents force them to do it, or, they will say, hey, you got accommodations in high school. Why don't you connect with the CSD on your campus and engage in that conversation? So, we have different ways of trying to reach out to students as they're incoming to the university to let them know about our office. And, we do things like this where we get out and we talk to different groups to let them know that our office exists so that they can refer students to us at any time. So we do work with students that may not have a diagnosis yet. And in terms of like what's available, it's really not a like, okay, you have this diagnosis and here's these accommodations that go with it, because we really look at every individual case by case and class by class basis, sometimes down to assignment by assignment. And what I mean by that is we can have a student that we are working with for deadline extensions, and that may be appropriate in 9 out of 10 assignments in a class, but there may be one assignment that, because of the nature of that assignment, maybe it's a group project, or maybe there's another factor, that one assignment can't be extended. And so we will engage with the student and the faculty member to figure all of that out. So it's so individualized and it's so interactive that it's tough to say like exactly what is available. We work with students with a variety of academic and residential accommodations. And then in addition, we do offer, as I was alluding to earlier, our Beyond Access program, which is available for students to enroll in. And that program pairs students up one-on-one with what we call strategy instructor in our center. And that's just a trained graduate assistant that comes to us with a background in doing this kind of work and academic coaching background. And they're, getting their graduate degrees in a related field, but they work with this student one-on-one for 1, 2, or 3 hours per week. And actually we're expanding it so that students can kind of meet with their strategy instructor like as an a la carte menu. So if they only want to meet 5 times through the whole semester, they can do that. But essentially, students will meet with their strategy instructor and come up with goals that they want to work on. And the strategy instructor's job is really to get to know that student as a learner and help them reach their goals in a way that makes sense to them. So that can be time management and organization. That can be specific study strategies. That could be breaking down assignments into smaller parts and coming up with like manageable tasks, like chunking the material. That can be working on social skills or stress management skills. It really can run the gamut in terms of what students would like to work with their strategy instructor on. Most of the students that do the program, I would say the program is open to students with or without disabilities. Most students that do the program do have a documented disability. And I would say of the students that do it, 70% are students that would identify as being on the spectrum or struggling with those executive functioning, having executive functioning challenges, and that's the skills that they need to build. So I hope that answers the question. I know that there was it looks like there was sort of 2 questions related to the services that our office works with. And so I hope that answered it, but if not, please let me know and I'm happy to provide more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. So we have another question just directed at all of the panelists about advice for advisors, balancing the delivery of information. I'm not entirely sure what's meant by that, but hopefully y'all understand.
I think a big part of that is asking the question, how do people process information? So if someone gets more, through having a conversation with someone than they do by reading an email, then maybe the best way to do that would be to have an in-person meeting and to limit email communication. If someone has anxiety and they're not able to process the information being relayed, then maybe it would be beneficial for them to have an email with kind of bullet points on what it is that needs to be addressed or what it is they're trying to say. But I think it comes down to communication and having a conversation with the person about what their needs are. Because even though, like, I think, one thing we don't want to do is, just because someone is on the spectrum, that doesn't mean that everybody gets painted with the same brush. People's, there's a reason why it is called a spectrum. It's a wide range of unique minds and different ways of processing information. So it takes having a conversation and just being open to having that conversation with someone to figure out, how they process information best, and then figure out how you're going to move from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just wanted to jump in and add, one of the things that I have made it a point to do with any student that I'm working with is, after we have a dialogue, whether that's in person or in this last year in this virtual environment, I make sure that I follow up with an email and kind of bullet the things that we talked about. Just to touch on what Sean just said, it could be that it's got nothing to do with their processing, and it's overwhelming because they've been on the computer all day and they're tired of having a conversation. It could be that they are working from home, or they're doing their schooling from home, and there's something going on in the background, and maybe they weren't really able to give me their undivided attention. Or it could be that they were in my office and there's too many pictures on the wall and they were distracted by that. So I really do try to always do that. And I think that that's a good strategy for anyone of any different learning style, is always follow up. If you are having a conversation in person, follow up with an email just to sort of highlight, like, okay, just to summarize, like, here's what we talked about. That way it makes sure that everyone is on the same page and the information is being communicated, and there's always something to refer back to.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a question about group projects. So are there any pros or cons associated with group work? And are there any things that make it easier or harder?
Yeah, I think we talked about this last week. For me, group projects. So in the Army, I was a behavioral profiler, and for cultures and different areas, regions. So when it comes to group projects now, I kind of use that to my advantage because I know what my work ethic is. And so I specifically seek out that couple students in the class that are going to be the ones that are like, yeah, let's get this done. So I've learned how to navigate group projects through that way, and finding other people with the same kind of work ethic and who want to actually get the project done right. But other people, even neurotypical people, some of them shy away from wanting to do group projects, but it's even worse. Like, if I didn't have that skill, even when I was still in the military, before I learned how to use that skill, I had to kind of find those like-minded work ethic people. It was terrifying for me, but I've learned to navigate it. I think a lot of us could learn those skills and actually navigate through the group projects with that.
Again, I think it depends on the person, but if when you can play off the person's strengths and then build a group around that, I think it would work really well. I don't know how practical that is in all cases, but I think that would be definitely one strategy I would use to try and set everybody up for success. I think the goal of creating a team is that you find someone for whom their gift is somebody else's challenge and their challenge is somebody else's gift. And I think that's what creates a strong group. But it's not always easy to do that when you have X amount of students. And you might be really aware of the person with the autistic person in the room and what their needs are, but you may not be aware of what everybody else's needs are, what their strengths are. So it may be difficult to build that group. And I think there's also something to be said for who determines who's going to be in the group. Is it something that is led by the students, or is it something that's determined by the prof? Because for a lot of neurodivergent thinkers, it's kind of like that old commercial in the Y where everybody gets picked except that last kid, and nobody wants to be that one. So then the person's kind of left feeling alone and shunned by a lot of people in the group, and that's something that we definitely don't want to happen. So it's just, it's I don't want to say it's a slippery slope, but it can be tricky to navigate.
I think that's a good point of where this program is intended to take the students with neurodiversity is that next step in the world. So doing these group projects, you're not going to get out of them when you're in your job. Like I said, if your job's to be a manager, you're going to have to manage. Managing a group is a group project. So having this right now is an incredible opportunity to start having these people learn these skills for that.
Absolutely. And we've already reached the end of our hour. Um, Thank you so much to everyone. I'm gonna say that we'll hang out for a few more minutes if folks want to keep asking questions. If our panelists need to leave, that's absolutely fine too. We want to be respectful of your time as well. But please do stay if you have any more questions. And this is a great conversation. I'm sure we could go on for hours and just keep talking about it. So hopefully we have sparked the conversation for some and we'll continue it on as we keep up with our work. So thank you so much to our panelists. You guys are amazing and thank you for sharing so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And I'm going to stop recording now.